You can't be here without clearance. The security guard's hand moved to his weapon as Edward Mitchell, 68, stood frozen in the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory corridor. Mitchell had been following his former colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, inside, chatting about old experiments, not realizing she'd badged through a secure door that had closed behind them. Now alarms were silent, but lights flashed red, and 2 more guards were running toward their position. "Hands where I can see them, do not move." Mitchell raised his hands slowly, his lined face confused but calm. Chen was already trying to explain, but the guards weren't listening. Protocol for security breaches was absolute. "Sir, you entered a classified area without authorization. We're detaining you until clearance can be verified. If you believe some doors, once opened, never fully close, comment 'respect' in the chat." Edward Mitchell had retired from Lawrence Livermore in 2003, 22 years of service, ending quietly with a small ceremony and a plaque that now gathered dust in his study. He'd been a physicist specializing in nuclear diagnostics, part of the team that had done groundbreaking work in the late 70s and early 80s. Work that was still classified, still relevant, still shaping national security decades later. In retirement, he'd moved to a small house nearby, consulted occasionally on unclassified projects, and maintained friendships with researchers who'd once been his students. Sarah Chen was one of those. She'd invited him for coffee in the cafeteria, to catch up, to hear his stories. He'd met her in the parking lot. They'd walked in together, talking animatedly about fusion research, and somehow he'd followed her through a door his old muscle memory recognized, but his current credentials didn't authorize. The guards escorted him to a holding room, not roughly but firmly, their faces professionally blank. Standard protocol, no exceptions. Mitchell sat in the small concrete room, hands folded on the metal table, waiting. He'd been through security procedures before, decades ago, knew this was just process. They'd verify his identity, check his old clearances, realize he'd made an honest mistake, and release him with a warning. Simple. Except when the senior security officer arrived, a stern woman named Rodriguez, who'd worked at the lab for 15 years, her expression suggested something more complicated. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to establish your identity and verify your access permissions. Please place your right hand on the scanner." She indicated a biometric reader, new technology that hadn't existed during his tenure. Mitchell complied, pressing his palm against the cool glass surface. The system whirred, reading his fingerprints, his palm geometry, his unique biometric markers. Then it froze. The screen flickered. Rodriguez frowned, trying the scan again. Same result. The system locked, displayed an error message in red text. Then the screen went completely black. That's odd. She tried rebooting the scanner. When it came back online and attempted to process Mitchell's data again, the entire security network went down. Every badge reader in the facility, every biometric scanner, every electronic lock system, all offline simultaneously. The backup generators kicked in, emergency protocols activated, and suddenly Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory was in lockdown, thousands of employees trapped in their current locations, unable to move through secured areas until the system reset. Rodriguez stared at her handheld radio as reports flooded in from across the facility. Widespread system failure. IT teams scrambling. No obvious cause. She looked at Mitchell, who sat calmly in the now locked interrogation room, his weathered face thoughtful. "Mr. Mitchell, what exactly did you do?" Mitchell shook his head slowly. "I just put my hand on the scanner like you asked. I haven't touched anything else. I haven't done anything." Which was true. What he hadn't said, what he didn't immediately understand himself, was that his biometric data was flagged in the system with protocols from an era when security architecture worked fundamentally differently. His fingerprints, his palm print, his entire biometric profile was linked to something the modern system wasn't equipped to handle. Rodriguez made a call to the IT security chief, her voice tight. "We have a situation. Subject Mitchell's biometric scan crashed the entire network. I need archive access to historical clearance records immediately." The investigation took 3 hours. 3 hours of Mitchell sitting in that concrete room, of engineers examining code, of archived databases being accessed that hadn't been opened in decades. Finally, Rodriguez returned with the IT chief and the laboratory director himself, Dr. Richard Torres, a man who'd taken over leadership long after Mitchell's retirement. Torres looked at Mitchell with an expression mixing awe and concern. "Mr. Mitchell, do you know what Founders Access protocols are?" Mitchell thought for a moment, memory stirring. Vaguely. "Something from the early days of classified computer security. Before my time, I think." Torres shook his head. "Not quite. When Lawrence Livermore transitioned to digital security systems in 1975, the nuclear weapons program required absolute fail-safe protocols. 6 individuals were designated as Founders Access, people who could override any system, access any area, whose credentials could never be revoked or restricted because they represented the core scientific authority for the entire nuclear program." Mitchell's eyes widened slightly. "I was in the diagnostic development team in '75, but I was junior staff. I wasn't authorized for that level of—" Torres cut him off gently. "You were 28 years old, and you just solved the primary diagnostic calibration problem that was holding up the entire weapons certification process. Your solution became the foundation for every subsequent test. Dr. Robert Teller himself designated you as one of the 6 Founder Access individuals, ensuring you could never be locked out of your own work, no matter what administrative changes occurred." He gestured at the dead security system. "Your biometric data isn't just in our system. It's in the foundation of our system. When you scanned your hand, the modern security protocols tried to process you as a normal subject, but your data triggered Founders Access authentication, which uses architecture that modern systems can't properly interface with. The conflict crashed everything." Rodriguez was staring at Mitchell like he'd suddenly become radioactive. "Sir, there are only 6 people with this clearance. We thought all of them were. I mean, the program is from 1975. We assumed—" Torres nodded. "We assumed they were all deceased, or the clearances were legacy artifacts that would never actually be used. Mr. Mitchell, you're the only living Founders Access individual. The others passed away years ago. Your biometric data has been dormant in our system for 50 years, waiting. When it activated, it essentially asked for permissions that our current security model can't properly grant or deny. So the system did the only safe thing. It shut down completely rather than risk either denying your access or granting it improperly." Mitchell sat back, the weight of this revelation settling over him. "So I didn't breach security. I had security. I've had it for 50 years and nobody knew." The laboratory director made a decision that would echo through classified channels for months. "Mr. Mitchell, effective immediately, your Founders Access is being officially reactivated and documented in current systems. We're creating interface protocols so that your biometric data doesn't crash our network, and we're requesting that you consult with our current teams on some of the diagnostic problems we've been facing, problems that trace back to systems you helped design 5 decades ago." Mitchell blinked. "I'm 68 years old. I've been retired for over 20 years. I'm not sure I'm the right person for—" Torres smiled. "Mr. Mitchell, you're one of 6 people in history trusted with absolute access to this nation's nuclear weapons development program. Your expertise doesn't retire just because you do. We need your knowledge. We've needed it for years, but didn't realize you were still available." The news spread through Lawrence Livermore like wildfire. The old guy who'd been detained for a security breach was actually a legend from the nuclear program's foundational era, someone whose work underpinned current research, whose clearances exceeded those of the current laboratory director. Young physicists who'd never heard of Edward Mitchell suddenly found themselves reading his papers from the '70s, realizing the techniques they'd been taught as standard practice had been innovations he'd pioneered. The security team completely rewrote their protocols for handling historical clearances, ensuring that any remaining legacy access individuals would be recognized rather than detained. Mitchell himself returned to the laboratory 3 days a week, consulting on diagnostic systems, sharing institutional knowledge that had been slowly disappearing as his generation aged out, bridging the gap between past innovation and current challenges. The interrogation room where he'd been detained became an unofficial pilgrimage site for new researchers. The place where the security system crashed because it encountered a ghost from its own foundation. A reminder that the work done decades ago still shapes the work being done today. Mitchell took it all with humble grace, never quite comfortable with the attention, always redirecting conversations back to the science, to the teams currently doing the hard work. "I just solved some calibration problems 50 years ago," he'd say when people called him a legend. "The real heroes are the people doing this work now, building on what we started, taking it further than we ever imagined." But his colleagues knew better. They'd seen the elegance of his solutions, the depth of his understanding, the casual mastery he brought to problems that stumped modern researchers. Subscribe to my channel if you believe expertise doesn't expire just because official tenure does. Edward Mitchell walked into a building he'd helped build, literally and figuratively, and was detained as an intruder. But the systems he'd helped create recognized him even when the people didn't. His biometric data carrying credentials that predated modern security architecture, proof that foundational work leaves permanent marks. The most important contributions are often invisible, buried in the infrastructure, waiting for the moment when someone remembers that the old ways still matter, that the people who built the foundations still have knowledge worth preserving. Honor those who came before, whose work you stand on without realizing it, whose names aren't in current directories, but whose fingerprints, literally, are embedded in the systems that protect us all.